The Quran describes the various embryological stages in great detail. The Quran mentions in Surah Mu'minun, chapter number 23, verse number 12 to 14, that we have created the human being from a quintessence of clay, then made it into a nutfah, a minute quantity of liquid, then made the nutfah into alaqa, a leech-like substance, then made the alaqa into mudga, that's a chewed-like lump, then made the mudga into izama, bones, then clothed the bones with lahm, that is flesh, and then we made a different creature. Glory be to Allah, who's the best to create. These three verses of the Quran describe the various embryological stages, the initial stages of development of a human being in the mother's womb in great detail. The Quran describes the various embryological stages in great detail. In Surah Mu'minun, chapter 23, verse number 12 to 14, it says, we have created the human beings from a quintessence of clay, then made it into a drop, placed it into Qararim Makin, place of security, then made it into an alaqa, something which clings, a leech-like substance, made that alaqa into mudga, a chewed-like lump, made that mudga into izama, bones, then clothed the izama, bones, with lahm, that is flesh, and then made it into a creature. Blessed is he, the best to create. This verse of the Holy Quran, from 12 to 14 of Surah Mu'minun, chapter 23, describe the embryological stages in great detail.
How could a desert Arab who knew nothing about science was so primitive that, for instance, they used to believe mountains to keep the sky out, would come to such conclusions?
I've read those sections of the Quran. I've read those sections of the Quran. I've read those sections of the Quran.
Do you disagree with the stages of embryology? The Quran, the seventh.
Yes,
Let him say
yes.
right, let him
The
say right.
Quran is babbling. It's throwing out these very vague, fuzzy descriptions, of the embryo looking like chewed flesh or whatever. When you look at what the Quran says about it, it is vague. It is ambiguous.
Sure.
It's the kind of stuff that a desert nomad might guess. The Quran is basically stealing from Greek embryology.
Galen, yeah?
Well, I'm talking specifically about Aristotle. My point is that there's very little about embryology in the Quran. What there is...
Details are not there, you're right. Details are not there, you're right. Details are not there, you're right.
The Quran describes the various embryological stages in great detail.
Details are not there, you're right. Yeah,
That's
the
right.
details are not
and
there.
what details are there are obviously cribbed from Aristotle. Like I say, when we look at the descriptions of embryology in the Quran, and we look at the descriptions of embryology in Aristotle,
Sure.
they're the same.
Well, in what way, sir? Would you like to give us...
I don't think they're the same.
The discussion of the development of bones, etc., all these things, the fairly crude stages that are described in Aristotle, it's obvious.
You may have a point there. I'm willing to accept that. What I'm saying is, I'm willing to accept that there may be similarities, not that Quran borrowed from Aristotle. My contention is that the specific stages described in the Quran, how does that match with what Aristotle said? I mean, those stages are quite peculiar to the Quran. Quran is quite unique in describing those stages because the
stages
bones are
is-
formed first and then the muscles, and this is how would a desert nomad know
Okay,
that?
right now I'm laughing at this idea that this is a specific description of embryology. Yes, bones develop first, then muscles.
I agree
come
it's
on.
general.
Yes.
No, I agree with you, it's
do.
general.
The Quran describes the various embryological stages in great detail.
Muscles
I agree
come
it's
on.
general.
Yes.
No, I agree with you,
You
it's
do.
general.
This
Professor,
is
Professor
something
Myers,
that you can infer just by rational thought about embryology. You can also determine this by looking at fetuses from different animals. You can look
By
at
desecration.
Once
Universe is
again, you've done it.
expanding, astronomy,
You've
universe is
equated these really crude, primitive guesses that you find in the Quran with the specific details of science.
So the interesting thing is, we should
No,
maybe...
it's not interesting. It's not. You're really boring me. That's what I'm telling you. That when, for instance, when we look at Aristotle's words, when we look at the descriptions in the Quran, we see a correspondence. That is evidence.
any correspondence.
Yeah, that's the point. That's just a
You haven't
statement.
shown us. It's just a statement. Aristotle is like the Quran. How?
According to Surah 23 verses 12 to 14, the fetus develops into bones, which are subsequently clothed in flesh. This too is plagiarized straight out of Hellenic science, this time from Aristotle, who stated the following, quote, "Round about the bones and attached to them by thin fibrous bands grow the fleshy parts, for the sake of which the bones themselves exist. For just as an artist, when he is moulding an animal out of clay or other soft substance, takes first some solid body as a basis, and round this moulds the clay, so also has nature acted in fashioning the animal body out of flesh." Unquote. This may be why Joseph Needham, who compiled a comprehensive history of embryology in 1934, dismissed the Quran's meagre scraps of embryological information as nothing more than, quote, "a 7th century echo of Aristotle and the Ayurveda," unquote. Clearly, Surah 22 verse 5 and Surah 23 verses 12 to 14 contain nothing more than a cursive and rather meagre rehash of Hellenic embryological science. There exists an even more likely source, however. Quote, "Such medical knowledge as Muhammad possessed, he may well have acquired from Harith ibn Kalda, an Arab, who is said to have left the desert for a while and gone to Jundi Shapur to study medicine. On his return, Harith settled in Mecca and became the foremost physician of the Arabs of the desert. Whether he ever embraced Islam is uncertain, but this did not prevent the Prophet from sending his sick friends to consult him." Unquote.
Aristotle also describes the emergence of bones and muscle
Right.
in sequence.
Right.
Okay.
And it's like the Quran.
And it's like the Quran, which
But does Aristotle say the bones come first and then the flesh and the muscles? Does he say that? Are you sure?
Anybody that works.
I'll let you think about this.
well,
Anyone that
if
works
you
with
are you
livestock
are
would
you
be
is
able
that
to
what
do that.
I'm not saying
wait,
it. Can you tell?
is
Are
that
you
what
sure?
is that what the Quran specifically says?
Absolutely, this is exactly what the Quran says. Absolutely, this is exactly what the Quran says. Absolutely, this is exactly what the Quran says. Chapter
we're done
23.
because you just demonstrated the Quran is wrong.
Yeah, but
How?
Professor Myers...
Because
How
that's,
is it
not,
wrong?
that's not what happens in
Well,
development.
this is what the embryologists are telling us.
The
This is
embryo-
exactly
no,
what the
they're not.
embryologists are telling us.
No, they're not.
Exactly
No,
what
they're
the
not.
embryologists are telling us.
No, they're not.
Exactly
No,
what
they're
the
not.
embryologists are telling us.
No, they're not.
Okay.
Embryologists-
Let me tell you what Keith Moore said. I mean, you can disagree with him.
He doesn't like Keith Moore.
I don't know why you don't. What he said on the page number 364A of his book, The Human Embryo.
Firstly, the page to which you refer was written not by Keith Moore, but by Abdul Majid Azadani. Any page in the book you referred to that ends with an alphabetic letter, page 364A, for example, is so. Furthermore, I actually contacted Keith Moore via his publisher, who told me that Muslims had taken his words out of context.
That in the 7th week the bones are formed, and immediately after that the flesh is formed, and the flesh, the bones
is
are clothed with
nonsense.
flesh. Well, Keith Moore is wrong. He's an embryologist. This is his field.
It's my field too. I know he's wrong.
You're an embryologist?
Yes.
Oh, great. Wow. Wow. That's news to me. That's news to me. That's news to me. That's news to me. Okay.
So that's wrong, because what happens first is you have differentiation of mesoderm.
Right.
That within the mesoderm you have segregation into things like embryonic mesenchyme, and then you have these cartilaginous centers that will form bone.
Right.
And these are forming simultaneously with each other.
Right. Simultaneously.
Yes. This is what I've been telling you.
Sure.
There are no embryological details of any consequence in the Qu'ran. I've read those sections of the Qu'ran. There are no embryological details of any consequence in the Qu'ran.
Well,
This is not stuff.
The details are not there. You're right. You're right. The
This is
details
not
are not
stuff
there.
that
The details are not there. You're right. You're right. The
This is
details
not
are not
stuff that
there.
requires a huge library to figure out. This requires a passing acquaintance with general knowledge about the primitive state of biology at the time. On the one hand, you are complaining that there's this detailed, wonderful science
Sure.
in the Qu'ran
Yes.
that you could only have learned from, revelation.
Sure.
And I'm saying that no, that what you find in the Qu'ran is an extremely primitive science that was nothing more than the common man could have learned from, general interactions with learned society at the time.
I think the really sad thing here is you're missing the enormous picture to focus on the pixel.
Yes.
I want you to think for a moment about the creator of the entire universe.
Yep.
Doesn't give a rat's ass whether you do anything good or bad in your life. All that matters, the sole criteria, is that you are gullible enough to follow the story of the least credible illiterate proponent you can follow. That's the sole criteria, and that's all.
No, that's not true.
Okay, if that's not it,
Can I
then an
explain?
unbeliever could be saved. An unbeliever would not go to hell.
that's true.
If all unbelievers go to hell, then the sole criteria is gullibility.
In conclusion, it is saliently clear that Hamza Andreas Sortsis and Adnan Rashid are wrong, and that the Quran contains factually incorrect embryological information plagiarized from Hellenic science. It further follows that the Quran is an erroneous document, P.Z. Myers and Aaron Ra win, and the embryological miracle in the Quran is utterly refuted. Thank you for listening.